Good morning, boys and girls. Today we're going to be reading the story, The Biggest Pumpkin Ever, and then we're going to be talking about the parts of a pumpkin inside and outside. It says, once there was a pumpkin. There were two mice who fell in love with the same pumpkin. Clayton, the house mouse, noticed it one day in the vegetable garden. It was still little and green, but Clayton thought he could make it grow really big. It might even get big enough to win the grand prize at the town pumpkin contest. Desmond, the field mouse, discovered the pumpkin the same day. He thought that if he helped it grow, it could become the biggest jack-o'-lantern in the entire neighborhood. That afternoon, Clayton watered the pumpkin. He also mixed up some fertilizer of manure and water. He spread the mixture around the pumpkin to make it grow larger. That very same night, Desmond went into the garden. He watered the pumpkin too. He also spread some manure mixed with water around it. So they are watering and taking care of the same pumpkin, and they don't even realize it. The next day, Clayton watered and fertilized the pumpkin again. The next night, Desmond did the same, and the pumpkin began to grow. By the end of a month, the pumpkin was so large, Clayton could hardly believe his eyes. "My goodness," said Clayton's mother, "and it's not even full grown." Clayton shrugged. "All I do is water it." Clayton's mother whispered in his ear, "If you want the pumpkin to grow bigger faster, you should use sugar water." That night, Desmond brought his brother Morris to see the pumpkin. Morris knew everything there was to know about growing things. "That's some pumpkin," he said. Desmond shrugged. "All I do is water it." "You should try using sugar water." So now they're both going to use sugar water, and I bet it's going to grow even more. The next day, Clayton dug a small hole beside the pumpkin vine. In the hole, he placed a bowl full of sugar water. He cut into the vine a few inches from the pumpkin. In the cut, he put one end of a piece of candle wick. Then he put the other end in the bowl of sugar water. That night, on the other side of the pumpkin, Desmond did exactly the same thing. Within a week, the pumpkin was twice the size it had been. Within 2 weeks, it was absolutely enormous. Clayton was amazed. He ran down the road and peeked into his friend Jimmy's pumpkin patch. The pumpkin Jimmy was growing for the contest looked much smaller. Clayton scratched his head. "I have an amazing pumpkin," he said out loud, "and I think I'm going to win the contest." That night, Desmond and his brother Morris spent a long time looking at the pumpkin. "How do you think it got that big?" "A little luck and a little skill. It's going to make some jack-o'-lantern." "It sure is." So they both think they're doing something else with it. I wonder what's going to happen. A week later, Clayton noticed the pumpkin was bigger than the family car. During the day, everyone he knew came by to admire it, and at night, all the field mice gathered round to do the same. By now, summer was almost over. In a week, the pumpkin would be full grown and start turning yellowish, and then orange. A few weeks after that, it would be ripe and ready for the pumpkin contest. Clayton could hardly wait. The pumpkin was growing so fast, it would soon be larger than his house. Then he had a terrible thought. If the pumpkin was so big, how would he get to the contest? It wouldn't fit in his red wagon. It wouldn't even fit in a truck. Clayton decided to worry about this when the time came. How is he going to get that to move? That night, the weather grew colder. Thinking there might be an early frost, Clayton rushed out to the pumpkin with his blanket. One was not enough. Soon he was rushing back and forth, carrying all the blankets from the house. As he worked, he hummed a little song. And as he hummed, he heard someone else singing. He also began to realize that someone else was covering the pumpkin with blankets. Desmond, too, had seen the danger of an early frost. He, too, had brought blankets for the pumpkin. And as he worked, he sang a little song. And as he sang, he began to realize that someone else was working and humming. Clayton stopped humming. He put down his pile of blankets and peered around the corner of the pumpkin. Desmond stopped singing. He put down his blankets and peered around the corner of the pumpkin. The two of them bumped heads and fell down. "You've been feeding the pumpkin? You've been feeding the pumpkin. That's why it got so big." They burst out laughing. When everything had been explained, Clayton said, "I know I'll win the contest if I can get the pumpkin to town." Desmond said, "I'll help you. Just let me carve the pumpkin into a jack-o'-lantern for Halloween when the contest is over." "It's a deal," said Clayton. "A deal," said Desmond. The morning of the contest was bright and sunny. Mice were bringing their pumpkins to the town square by truck and car and wagon. Some were rolling them along the ground. You can see them shaking. And then there they are, all bringing their pumpkins into town. Suddenly, they all stopped short. Over the fields came the biggest pumpkin anyone had ever seen, and it was pulled by 100 field mice on motorcycles. When the pumpkin reached town, it was too big for any of the streets. Clayton had to explain why they couldn't bring it to the square. The mayor understood at once. He led the crowd to the giant pumpkin and pinned the first prize ribbon on its side. Then everyone danced around it. Who would have believed this? When the celebration was over, the 100 field mice pulled the pumpkin back to the field the day before Halloween. They carved it into the best jack-o'-lantern ever. And on Halloween night, its wonderful smiling face could be seen glowing for miles around. All right, boys and girls, now we're going to switch over and we're going to learn about the insides and the outside parts of a pumpkin. Hi, boys and girls. Okay, so we are going to look at, I have a little pumpkin here. This is my daughter's pumpkin that she brought home from her harvest party that she had last week. And I wanted to talk about the parts of an outside of a pumpkin, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the inside parts of a pumpkin. So when you look at the outside of the pumpkin, a pumpkin is a vegetable. It grows on a vine, which we learned when we learned about the life cycle of a pumpkin on Monday. So we have the stem, okay, and usually this is where the pumpkin, when they chop the stem, this is where the pumpkin is connected to the vine. So it goes much longer and then connects to the vine on the plant. Now, once it's ready, they chop it off. So the stem is usually pretty thick and hard, and it is a little bit prickly on the outside. Then we have the orange color, and as I was reading about the parts of a pumpkin this week, I learned that the darker orange, the pumpkin, that usually means that it has more seeds. So if you want a pumpkin, if you like pumpkin seeds, if you want a pumpkin with lots of seeds, it's best to go with a pumpkin that has a nice, dark, rich orange color. Now, if you can see, every pumpkin has these lines coming down from the stem. These are called the ribs. And as I was researching about why does a pumpkin have ribs, I learned that each rib has a row of seeds. So the more ribs that the pumpkin has, the more seeds that are inside of it. Okay, and then the orange part on the outside is called the skin. So the parts of the pumpkin outside are pretty simple. We have the stem, we have the skin, and we have the ribs, which are the lines that we counted yesterday. Okay, so now I wanted to show you, I already have a pumpkin that I carved with my kids. And I wanted to show you the top so you could see what the layers of the inside of a pumpkin look like. So this is the top of the pumpkin that I cut out, and I wanted to show you. Now I got rid of, when you pull this out of the pumpkin, there's little strings and seeds that hang down. So there's fibrous strands, those are all the stringy parts. Then we have the seeds, and then we have a layer that's called, so this is the layer that's the skin, the dark orange and even the green, that's part of the skin. And then right here, this big, thick, yellowy orange part, that's called the pulp, boys and girls. So if you think about, if you like to drink orange juice sometimes has pieces of pulp in it. That's the inside of the orange. And this part is the inside of the pumpkin, the pulp. So we have the skin here that's orange and green. We have the pulp. And then we also have the fibrous strands that hang down, the stringy part, and the seeds that are the inside of the pumpkin. Okay, now I would like you to go ahead and do your seesaw assignment, and I hope you have a wonderful day.